The book that I chose to do my Book Essentials paper on is called Rethinking Sexism, Gender, and Sexuality. This book includes many different stories told by different authors regarding the different topics. For my paper, I chose to write about notable quotes and the educational advice that is offered on sexism and sexuality in schools. I created a summary of some of my favorite chapters that I feel were most important, specifically regarding my PE and health major. As a future physical education teacher and health teacher, I feel that it is really important to focus on gender and sexuality and the way that they have changed throughout the years and are continuously changing. This book gives really great perspective on a lot of different scenarios and situations that we as educators will definitely face in our careers. Not only does the book include different statistics and facts that I feel are very important, it also has real life stories that I think hold a much greater value and are important for not only teachers, but also parents and other students to be able to hear and be able to relate to. When we were given the options of the books to pick for this class, I went out of my comfort zone by choosing this book. I thought that it would mostly relate to the ways that I would teach health, and I do think that that is the way that I viewed the book. However, I also think that any teacher would gain a lot from reading this book, not only as a future health teacher and not just in a health classroom setting, but in the school system as well. I really hope that my key points that I mention speak to you and you find interest in them and maybe read the book for yourself. Let's begin. The first chapter that stood out to me was called Queering Our Schools. According to the glossary in the back of the book, queer is defined as an umbrella term for people who do not conform to heterosexual and/or gender binary norms. Originally a derogatory slur, queer is a word that has been reclaimed. The first notable quote says, "To lump disparate behaviors together under the generic bullying is to efface real differences that affect young people's lives. Bullying is a broad term that degenders, deraces, de-everythings school safety." This was an excerpt from 10 Ways to Move Beyond Bullying Prevention and Why We Should. I find this quote extremely interesting because words such as racism, sexism, homophobia, and others get glossed over and considered under the term bullying. This is because people are too afraid of such terms. They don't want to consider it labeling, which in reality, that's exactly what it is. I think that this is a unique way to phrase that we should be more specific and not scared to say to students that they are being, for example, racist, rather than saying they are bullying. Giving the terminology creates a sense of accountability for students as well as adults. Another part of this chapter that stood out to me was the unfortunate story of a teacher named Jodi Scalauer, who was accused of talking about her sex life when she came out to her 7th grade class. Being given a disciplinary letter in her file, this sets a precedent to other educators and to students that being gay is a punishable offense. Another notable quote states, "The ideas that we are different than they and that now is better than then forms a kind of comfortable relief when we are confronted with history's horrors." This powerful quote describes how people hide behind a false reality that our society is being more accepting and fair than in the past. Before I begin discussing The next chapter that I found really interesting, I'd like you to stop and take a look at the image above. These Disney prince and princesses are the highlight of many children's childhood. Often at recess, they will play games with their friends, pretending to be the prince and princess in love and getting married. I, like many other educators and parents, would consider this a completely appropriate age to be playing pretend and to viewing such movies. This chapter discusses how as soon as the conversation changes from a man and a woman to a man and a man or a woman and a woman, it suddenly becomes taboo or something sexual. This brings up the question, is love too sensitive for class discussion? A lot of times parents say they wish to save these conversations for at home. This might be my favorite part of the book. And Tango Makes Three by Peter Parnell and Justin Richardson is a children's book based on a true story of two male penguins who fell in love at the Central Park Zoo. The zookeeper gives these penguins an egg of their own, since penguins mate for life. The controversy of the book is that the subject matter is, quote-unquote, teaching young children to be gay, when in fact, it is just an incredible story about love and acceptance that children can relate to. This next chapter is one that falls close to my heart. Like I said before, being a PE and a health teacher, the topic, 7 tips for teaching sex ed, is really important for me to consider. A quote by Erica Hart says, "Teenagers want to know that they are normal. They are in a period of huge social development, so if their friends are all having sex in certain ways, they are probably going to want to be a part of that. As educators, it is up to us to guide them." This was extremely relatable to me because I have been a health educator in the past, and that is what I hope to do in the future. As someone who has had a classroom, I based it on trust and respect. When we began the sexual education unit, I made sure that my students understood that they were safe in the classroom and able to openly ask questions. I wanted to make sex seem less silly to discuss, and I wanted it to be more informational. I think a lot of teachers who are put in my position to teach sex to high schoolers would feel really uncomfortable. However, I think that my comfort in the subject helps the students to be comfortable and to explore safely and to ask questions that they may have. However, this does relate to all teachers, not just those who educate on sex. Another notable quote by Erica Hart says, "I don't know that teachers always acknowledge the difference that we make and the influence we have. What we say at the front of the room is generally what the student is going to believe." I feel strongly that all educators need to be reminded this frequently. It's very easy to forget how pliable young minds are and the influence that teachers have on their thoughts and actions. The Day of Silence is a day where students remain silent to better understand people who feel that they must remain silent about who they are. Adriana Murphy explains that there were 2 fundamental challenges with this day. Number 1, middle schoolers are not very good at being silent. And number 2, students wanted to know how their silence actually helped people who felt they weren't free to be themselves. The school decided to change a day of silence into a day of action. Workshops were held on this day of action, things that included being an ally, discrimination in a workplace, coming out, being a gay dad, and many others were topics of conversation that the students were able to get involved in on the day of action. The last notable chapter was called An Open Letter to My Son's Teacher. This letter by Shannon Panzee is meant to talk to the teacher about how her son used to be considered a girl in the eyes of the school system, and over the summer had the courage to transition to be a boy. Some tips that were included were to allow Sam, during any sort of gender separation, to consider himself a boy. Also, to keep him safe in the bathrooms, in the playground, from children who may not understand his circumstance. This parent's letter is truly admirable that they're willing to help their son in any way they deserve, no matter what gender they identify as. I hope you have enjoyed my synopsis of the book and take some part of what I said with you into your future as being an educator. Thanks for listening if you made it this far.